Hey everyone, this is Dr. Russ Jones.
And Brad Kennan.
We are wide open.
So how you doing tonight, Russ?
I'm good. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited about our guest tonight.
So am I.
Beautiful fall day. I was in the woods today. Found something really cool that I'll have to send to you so we can post it maybe on Instagram.
Okay.
In the woods today.
Is it bigger than a bread box?
Yeah, you know, that's about a mile in, and it was a stump that was completely over-covered with sticks and debris. You know, it was off trail. There's really no way for anybody to get there without walking there. It was clearly done by something. It wasn't a hunter because there was other stumps in that area, you know, that were a little closer to this cliff edge. The deer hunter would kind of want to be up where he could see, but it's pretty cool.
So, but I thought you're against tree structures and you don't really believe them.
I think
you think that trees, I think the branches just fell and the wind blew the leaves and that's where it caught.
I think that some of the great apes do it, but I think that it's insane on Facebook and all the stuff that you see around here. Everything is something. And I think people get it all backwards. I mean, you know, today I was looking to see if I could find tracks around it, but I mean, I don't know how it is in Ohio, but in West Virginia, we have had no rain for several weeks, and the leaves are like 4 or 5 inches thick everywhere you go.
They're dry and crackly, and yeah, it's just rough.
Hey, anyway, I got a question for you.
Go ahead.
We were talking about this one time, and so I kind of ran some numbers today. I did Ohio and West Virginia because I thought you might be interested in that.
Okay.
And everybody's talking about game cameras and why we don't have Bigfoot on game cameras. So I was going to let you take a guess that if we were going to cover the state of Ohio, how many game cameras would we need to do that?
Now, are you talking the entire state of Ohio, or just forest and wooded areas?
Okay, so I'll wind it down a little bit for you. So we don't have to do cities. We don't have to do fields. We just have to do the forest.
Okay.
And then because animals move and they don't stay in one place, we only have to do ever how many acres. So usually master naturalists, when they're trying to figure out, say, for instance, deer, we want a camera every 20 acres. Okay. So I figured it out.
One camera every 20 acres?
One camera every 20 acres.
Oh, crap. Okay.
Yeah. You know,
it doesn't seem like very many. 20 acres.
Well, you know, animals are moving through there. They got to feed, they got to breed, they got to do whatever animals do.
Okay.
Pee, poop. And so what is your guess? Do you know how many, tell you how many acres of woods there are in Ohio?
Sure.
There is 8 million acres of woods in Ohio.
All right. Well, I was going to guess 1 million trail cameras, but that's only one per every 8 acres. So that's not really going to record a whole bunch of stuff, I don't think.
No, you would need around 130,000 game cameras.
That's it?
Yeah.
One for every, what, 20 acres?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So in Ohio,
you're telling me 20 acres. If I used to own, my parents owned 15.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty, you know, one game camera barely even touches where they're at. I mean, that wouldn't touch, you know, the front of their barn.
Yeah. In the course of a year, everything that lives on there would pass in front of your game camera.
Okay. So 130,000.
Theoretically.
So at how much is a Reconyx these days?
$500.
$500.
Yeah.
So 130,000. So I didn't check my numbers. I don't think I won the $2 billion jackpot. I could have, but it was sold in California. So I don't think it was me. So
yeah,
I guess you're not getting a grant to buy 130,000 game cameras.
Yeah. A little interesting side note here. So Ohio has 360,000 hunters.
Okay.
36% of them use game cameras.
Okay. So that tells you that's about 130,000 game cameras.
That is about 100,000 game cameras, but I gave you the wrong number. You would need 400,000 cameras.
Okay.
To get it done.
Okay.
So, you know, 8 million acres divided by the 20 acres gives you 400,000. We have about 130,000 of them now. But keep in mind, these are people that are only leaving them out part of the year. They're putting them over feeders. They're putting them in places where it's probably deer behavior is what they're interested in.
Sure.
Or maybe whatever. Okay, so let's do it for West Virginia. West Virginia has 12 million acres. So
Wow.
More than Ohio.
Sure.
It has 210,000 hunters, 75,000 cameras out, but it needs 600,000 cameras to do one.
Wow.
Yeah. Not a very good chance.
Not a very good chance at all.
Yeah.
So what what they say, right? Fish where the boats are.
Yes.
So put them up where in an area that has sightings and prior sightings. Maybe you're the expert on this, so I'm not even going to attempt to go into it because obviously you're the expert. I am not.
Well, I don't have a picture yet, right? With my 40-something game cameras.
You have some things.
Yeah.
You have things that are questionable.
Yeah, things that I don't want to show the public or
right.
I'd be ripped to shreds.
Right. Well, it's sad that that's where we're at these days.
Yeah, that is where we're at.
Since, Elon Musk bought Twitter, maybe you can start posting on Twitters and he's going to get all the Russian trolls off. So,
okay. Well, there we go.
There you go. So I tell you who would probably be, we can ask him about game cameras, but, I don't know how long have game cameras been around?
That's a good question. I would say that I can remember I started putting them out and there was actual film in them and it had a white flash. And that was probably, 20 something, maybe 30 years ago.
Okay. So this man's father could have used game cameras because they could have been in their infancy, but he probably did not. But we can ask him. Are you ready to bring our guest on?
Yes.
So, Michael Freeman, welcome to the show. Michael. How you doing?
Hey guys, how you guys doing? I'm doing all right.
Good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, you as well.
Well, you're going to ask him, Brad. I want to know whether his dad, I admired his dad. He was kind of he was a legend. He was somebody who was actually in the field and not somebody sitting on a couch or behind a desk talking about what Bigfoot may or may not be.
Right. That was, I've heard some of the interviews he's done and some things about his father, and for a man to take a night job so he can go squatching every morning, that takes dedication, and a lot more dedication than I have personally. I would never do that. I just don't have it in me. But Michael, we were talking about game cameras and we were wondering, the famous Freeman footage was obviously not shot with a game camera. But is that something your dad ever looked into, maybe ever had around the house or used them ever during his research?
No.
Okay.
Never owned a game camera. The footage at Deduct was shot in 1992, which is 30 years ago this year. So I don't know when they started coming out either, but I think they would have been in their infancy for sure. And we didn't have a lot of spare money laying around, so it's something that's he never used, but would have been nice.
Yeah, it's fun. A lot of people think that we should go back to in the 50s and 60s. Some of the Boy Scouts had these cameras that were on a tripwire or something, had to hit it and it came out and it flashed a big white light, and everybody thinks that maybe we should go back to that so we don't have the electronic noise and sound and everything like that. But gosh, it's hard enough to see a Bigfoot, let alone get one to trip your wire.
Yeah, I don't know, if we'd want to go back to something like that or not. I suppose we could try it.
What do you think? Maybe you should tell everyone that doesn't know Brad, who Michael is and what he's doing and about his father or whatever.
Well, do you want me to tell him or do you want Michael to tell him? Michael's probably the best guy to tell him.
Okay, well,
go ahead, Michael.
But tell us about your dad.
Remember, we were talking about not being a third wheel. You're not the third wheel. You're driving the bus today.
All right. Well, I'll do my best to drive the bus.
Drive the bus, man.
Yeah. No. I am the son of Paul Freeman, who is one of the pioneer Bigfoot researchers, especially in Washington State and Oregon State, and is considered by a lot of people to be a legend in the field.
He is absolutely a legend. And for the people that don't know Bigfooting, they can go to any YouTube channel or anywhere in YouTube or Instagram and just, look up Paul Freeman footage. And there it is. It is literally I do believe it's, behind Patterson Gimlin, it is the next best piece of footage out there. It's an amazing piece of footage. I've looked at it over the last couple of days, I've probably watched it 50 times. And it's anybody that says this animal's not real is got to have mental problems, because they have to be insane with the amount of proof that's out there. So anyway,
I think that it's like some people, there was some people I think that were jealous of Paul Freeman, in a long time ago in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, a lot of people didn't believe that you could ever have more than one Bigfoot sighting. Even at that point, they didn't even think Bigfoot was on the East Coast. And so all of a sudden you have this guy that, finds all these footprints, he ends up having a couple of videos, and he was getting more than everybody else. But the reality is he was in this perfect spot, and he was spending more time than everyone else was. So when you start dividing it out by the length of time that he was doing it, it seems pretty reasonable to me, what he was finding. But he had a job. I think he was a ranger patrolling a watershed that people weren't really allowed into because it was providing water to Walla Walla, Washington, I think, if I remember right.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
And so when your dad was patrolling that, he had a sighting, and that's what really got him going with the Bigfoot thing. And so I know he was out there like several days a week, many times before daylight, waiting to check these spots. In particular, when it was droughty in July, August, early September, there was a particular pond and a spring that fed it that, he had found some tracks at. And I know he essentially camped out there, not really camped out, but, he was there an awful lot just checking on, see if he could find those tracks. I was curious, how far was your dad driving to go up there?
Yeah, Deduct Spring is the location that you're speaking of, and that's where he got the footage in 1992. It was about an hour and a half drive from our home. And so, my dad was working a night job at the time, and he would get off work about 4:00 in the morning, and he would get up there, 5:30, 6 a.m., 3 to 4 days a week at that time. And the week prior to him actually getting the footage, he had been there every day.
That's commitment.
Well, he knew they were going to be there. I mean, he had 10 years of tracks and location data on his Forest Service map that he had been, marking on there. Him and Bill Lowry and Wes Summerlin and David Bean and Dar Addington and Grover Krantz, all those guys. So anytime there was a sighting in that area, anytime there were footprints found, whether it was them or it was just somebody else, they heard anything, it went on this map. And this happened for 10, 11 years. They put all this location on there. And basically, they were mapping migration, at the time in the mid 80s. And, I guess that's what they were planning on doing. It's something you see commonly now, but not done back then. So I think he was a little bit ahead of his time. But one thing that he did notice was that late summer, late August, every other or every third year, there was a lot of activity around Deduct Spring. And so he had really zeroed in on that location by 1992. He was spending a lot of time there. And, we'd get the Freeman footage basically from his, hard work and his research and a little bit of luck, as well.
It's interesting that most of the Bigfoot sightings are not where someone's actually going out looking for a Bigfoot. Most of the Bigfoot sightings are incidental. And it was kind of a fluke that your dad actually got to see him because, I know he thought that they were coming during the night or when early morning. And so he was always up there at daylight. But I know that in reality, they had been watching him and waiting for him to leave before they came out. I know that if I remember correctly, your sister had car problems and your dad had went to work on it. And so as a result of that, he had got there later that day. I mean, it blows me away when you said an hour and a half, because I was thinking, no, it's probably 20 or 30 minutes. But, dude's driving an hour and a half each way to go look for Bigfoot stuff 4 days a week, year round, when he can get up there or whatever because of the snow. But
right.
So it was a fluke thing, like so many sightings, that your dad was able to get that footage as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was a little luck, you know, and a little chance that went into it. And he had the right area, and he knew that they were going to be there. And so he had the right spot, and he had the right reason for them coming. But yeah, there's always a little bit of luck. And, you know, like I said, he was getting there around 6 o'clock in the morning. And his thought process at the time was that they were coming earlier than him, and they were getting the water, like you had said, and then they were leaving, and that they had figured out, you know, his scent or his routine, and he was never going to catch them. And, you know, my sister had some car problems the night before, had called him, asked if he would come over and fix the car, and he said he would. And he didn't have any plans on even going to Deduct that day. He got off like work and went and fixed my sister's car. And then he was actually driving home, and he just kind of, you know, thought, well, what the hell? I'll go up there. Maybe there's some fresh tracks or maybe some sign. My mom was at work. I was hanging out with some friends. He didn't have anything to do anyway. And, you know, being in the mountains and looking for Bigfoot was his passion. So he just went ahead and went up there and actually got up there. The time is a little debatable. It's one of the mysteries we have. There's some record that he got there about 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't necessarily think that's correct. I think it was about 10:30 personally. But either way, it was somewhere between, you know, 3 to 4.5 hours later than normal. And, you know, the rest is history. Like, we have it on the footage. He walked right up on one. And so I'm thoroughly convinced, you know, as you already stated, that they were already there. You know, he was correct. They were coming earlier, but they were watching him, and they were waiting for him to leave. And then they were coming to get the water. And that particular morning, when he wasn't there for the first time in a week, you know, they made a mistake, and they either hung around too long, or they didn't notice his approach. And, you know, we have the footage.
Now, this thing comes on this camera from right to left. So is the spring to the right or the pond to the right? And it was
left.
down. So the pond was on the left.
Yes. It's down behind where he's taking the video from, to the south, and to the left. If you watch the very beginning of the footage.
So it's behind, and he's walking up the trail.
Yeah.
So because he says, hey, I can see where it came down and went back up.
Yeah. And if you watch the very beginning of the footage where he's talking about the tracks being really fresh, he's right at the edge of the pond.
Okay.
And that's the one cast that we do have from the footage comes from right there. It's one that he has on camera. That's the cast that we have. And then the rest of the tracks that are in the road, they're just kind of disturbances in the dust, because the trail there is way too hard to even make any tracks on. So I'm shocked that there were even footprints there, which just shows you how heavy it was.
Now, if I go somewhere and I take a video with my phone or camera, or whatever it is, it does not do justice to what I'm seeing. You know, a lot of times, hey, I can make out exactly what I'm seeing, but I put my camera up and I really can't see it that well. It looks, maybe it's further away. How far was this thing actually away from your father when he videotaped this thing?
We think it was about 60 feet.
60 feet is not very far.
So not very far.
So a holding penalty plus, you know, or a roughing the passer plus an offsides, there's freaking 60 feet right there.
You know, yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
That is not very far.
So, you know, keep in mind that the camera he shot the footage on was 8mm digital magnetic tape. It's not great technology. It was convenient for the time. And he had the camera. It didn't have the flip out screen on the side of it. It just had the viewfinder that rotated.
Right.
And so that's all you could look through. If you watch it, you notice when he's looking at the tracks, he's kind of zooms in to look at the tracks, and then he zooms out before he pulls away, and then he's looking a little bit, and it's zoomed out, and it doesn't zoom back in when the creature, we'll say, you know, makes its appearance and walks across. And it's just, he never thought, I guess, to zoom it back in to get any closer at that point in time. But, you know, that's one of the mysteries as well, because we don't know the exact camera that he was using. And it was something that was lost many, many years ago. And so we don't know how far he was zoomed in. But the estimation right now, based on some measurements that have been done by a few people, is about 60 feet.
Okay. At this point in time, I would have had a heart attack, no matter what. Yeah. If you're expecting it, not expecting it, it's there. It's big. You know,
big. Yeah.
It's big. It's massive.
So I think that one of the interesting things is all of us that are interested in Bigfoot, for literally decades here have been looking at that film that your dad had. But because I was lucky enough, you guys let me look through the book that just have coming out here, or maybe when people are seeing this episode, it's going to be out. I was able to see the clearest image that had ever been put out. It had been cleaned up. It had been overexposed, underexposed, zoomed in, zoomed out, all these different things. And it was very, very compelling. I know that particular Bigfoot is a little thick through the middle. And so a lot of people thought that, she was pregnant. But then at the end of the video, I know Doug Hychek had seen for the first time little arms and legs moving around that other people hadn't noticed in the past. I know your father hadn't even noticed it, because I know that they'd had a conversation about that. And when you see that, you realize that the Bigfoot was probably postpartum. She had that baby and, hadn't lost the baby fat, so to speak. So I found it really compelling then, especially at first when he was doing the under and over exposures. I was like, oh gosh, but then when I saw her with the overexposure, I could really see the tummy better than I could in any other shot. And it made me feel there was no question it was legitimate. And then to be able to go, it has the RQ codes in the book where people can put their phone up there and they can hear your father actually talk about different subjects that no one's ever heard in the public before, largely. It was very compelling. And he kind of cracked me up. I know a couple of things I wrote down that he said that everybody has the right to their own damn opinion. And, it just made me laugh when the way that he said that. And then they'd ask him, he had suffered a lot in his life, a lot of ridicule. I mean, Bigfoot's popular right now, pretty cool. But your dad financially was giving up a lot to do that. It wasn't like he was a rich man. His time, put a strain on the family relationship, I'm sure, being up there that much and spending time camping and whatnot. And they'd ask him whether or not it was worth it. If, they found out Bigfoot was real or whatever. And he said, you damn betcha, every bit of it. He was so passionate about it. And I think that, Brad and I talked to a lot of people. The researchers really don't spend a lot of time in the field anymore. I'm not sure that what I should say anymore, or maybe just in general, no one's out there that much like your father was. And, so there's very few that are as passionate as he is about it.
So, we were talking before the episode and you were talking about, I got a theory about, he was kind of did this Good Morning America gig and he was kind of drugged through the mud. But I got a theory on that in a second. But you also were talking about with the Forest Service, and I don't know what happened there. Can you tell us, really what happened with that?
Yeah. So he had his first sighting on June 10th, 1982, and he was working for the Forest Service, and there were some tracks found there. And then that made some headlines, of course. And then 6 days later, on June 16th, he was with a fellow employee, a man by the name of Bill Epic. And they were actually on a lunch break, and they came across 40 more footprints. And it was from two different individuals.
Now, when you say they're on their lunch break, wasn't he did he check boundaries or something of that sort with? Yeah,
he was, what was called a boundary patrolman or an outrider.
So he's not in the parking lot of this, this nice little cabin eating lunch out of the microwave. He's out in the middle of nowhere, correct? I would assume
he's out in the middle. Yeah, he was a boundary patrolman. So my dad was responsible for 25 square miles of the watershed.
Okay.
And to keep a watch on that every day to make sure there were no trespassers or poachers, things like that. So, yeah, I mean, they were at a place called Elk Wallow, my dad and Bill Epic, which is in the watershed. It's not accessible to the public. You have to be a government employee to even set foot in there. They were eating sandwiches, and they had, decided to go eat in this certain spot or whatever. And they came across 40 footprints from two different individual Sasquatch, one of which was the one that my dad had seen 6 days prior. Same footprints, they match up. Grover Krantz, I believe, is the one that's, figured that out, that was the same individual. And the second set of footprints was a different individual that hadn't been seen before. And that's where we get the Paul Freeman dermals from that second individual. And, those are still housed in the Smithsonian Institution because Grover Krantz, took them there and they have them. But, to get back to your question, basically what ended up happening was ABC, NBC, and CBS wanted access into the watershed so they could bring the news media in to do a story on these tracks and, the sighting that had happened 6 days prior. And the Forest Service would not grant them permission. And so they filed an injunction through the court to get access, for the media. And they were given 48 hours by a judge. So a judge made a decision on it, gave the Forest Department 48 hours to prove that the tracks were fake by way of hoax. Otherwise, the national news media was going to be let into the watershed, which brings us to Mr. Joel Harden, who was a tracker for the government, worked for U.S. Border Patrol, who was brought in to say that the tracks were fake, which is exactly what he did. And we have a record from Grover Krantz, who tells us that he's, overheard Forest Service employees talking about how Mr. Harden had said the tracks were fake before he even looked at them. Well,
I mean, who signs his paycheck? It's always follow the money, right? His paycheck says Uncle Sam on it. He's going to do what Uncle Sam says.
Yeah, no offense to Mr. Harden. I'm sure he's a great tracker. But there was a reason he was brought in, and he was brought in by the government because they did not want a media circus in government land, and they didn't want a bunch of civilians with guns trying to go into the watershed after this media circus to hunt Bigfoot, and to do all this. Sure. And so there were reasons for that. But, that's the first time that my dad kind of got labeled as, a possible like hoaxer or something like that, was because, Joel Harden came in and looked around and said, well, these can't be real, and there was a few reasons for that. One of the things was that the tracks, they didn't have any straddle from side to side. And he said that something that big would have to have straddle. But we know from, decades now of Bigfoot, Sasquatch tracks that they don't really have a straddle. Right. And a lot of times they're a straight line. One of the other things he didn't like was the fact that they had dermal ridges, and that, animals don't have dermal ridges on the pads of their feet. And that's a human characteristic. Or great apes, which, he didn't have any experience tracking either. He's also not a believer in Bigfoot still to this day. So any set of tracks you set in front of him, he's probably not going to say that they're real, And there was a few other things, the tracks were too perfect, or, the distance between its stride, didn't vary enough, things like that he kind of had an issue with. But, long story short, he said, yeah, these aren't fake. The Forest Service won, the injunction. They didn't have to let the media in, and, everybody's happy. In the meantime, my dad gets demoted to a desk job. He's not able to go out on foot anymore. He's no longer a boundary patrolman. He's told to stop talking about this. And he's pretty much shut up in the newspapers. And the Forest Service went as far as to drug test him and to actually insinuate that maybe he was drunk, on the job. So, they did a really good job of kind of shutting it up and kind of, painting it as that he was not a reliable source.
Well, like I said, it's just, I don't believe that, you got to follow the money. This guy was brought in by the federal government. They're looking at him and saying, hey, this thing cannot be real. Don't you understand? Period. Just don't make up what you want. Go back to your daily job. You're a great tracker, great, all that stuff, but you're our expert, and you're going to tell them it's not real. And that's what you're going to do to keep your job. And now we're going to be done. And here you go. So
he's a man tracker.
He was a man tracker. Yeah. He worked for the Border Patrol. He was not a wild game tracker. And like I said, he wasn't a third party tracker they brought in. He's another government employee, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
I can only imagine, how hard that must have been on your father. I know years ago, I talked to a policeman that was here in West Virginia, was the resident tracker, and had knew Joel and taken his classes, and that's how he got certified. And we had talked about that at length. And he understood, this gentleman believes in Bigfoot, that, you know, the main objection, of course, was the straddle point. And, you know, and you could tell that Joel was almost a little proud of that he had caught that. But in retrospect now, it's, you know, I mean, even Bigfoot has a little straddle, but it's not much. And, you know, that's one of the primary things that people look at when we're, you know, trying to put tracks together. So, you know, it's a shame that your dad had to be part of that.
So if you do a quick research and you look up spotted owl. So this, I always go to the spotted owl whenever I hear about things. So, you know, I know your dad was on Good Morning America, and basically I think they did an interview with him prior, and they kind of, when they did the interview, they kind of hacked it up, basically saying, hey, have you ever faked a track? And he says, well, yeah, I, you know, kind of did them in my backyard, in my garden, to see if it could be done. But which, you know, we've all thought about doing that or done that, taking cast. You know, you take your foot, stick it in a thing, make it a silicone out of it. And I seen a guy like maybe blow it up somehow, like he put some chemicals in it, kind of made it bigger. And he said, look, I can kind of do this. Well, it's not really the same. You can tell it's still fake. So they kind of did this hit piece on him. So if you kind of look back in time and say, okay, well, Good Morning America was obviously owned by some giant corporation. And I'm going to, like I said, I always get my tinfoil hat, and I put my tinfoil hat on. So it's owned by some big corporation. This corporation, you know, you look back at Hearst Publishing or some of these things like the fortunes that have been out there from, you know, for 100 years. They controlled lumber. They controlled paper. So if that Bigfoot is known to exist, they're publishing their paper, they're logging the warehouses of the world. They wouldn't even be able to cut a tree down, let alone continue with what they're doing. So in 1990, the logging industry estimated up to 168,000 jobs would be lost due to the spotted owl. And that's just an owl. Think about a intelligent primate walking around the woods. You wouldn't be able to get out of your car.
Well, you remember what happened to the owl then too. You know, the government, well-intentioned, shuts everything down. Then what happens, it largely goes extinct because we find out later that it needs secondary habitat, secondary forest growth. We're putting out all the forest fires. We're not allowing timber cutting. That's where you get the secondary forest growth, and that's where it nests. That's where it feeds. So, you know, man always thinks he knows best, but many times does. And I think that's the same way with Bigfoot. You know, Bigfoot clearly, if it's been around as long as, you know, all of man has been in the United States, you know, even indigenous men, then he's gotten along fine without men, with, you know, having forest fires, times of great hunger, times of peril. And I don't think it needs man to exist.
No, obviously not.
Yeah, certainly not. No.
Okay.
Let me ask a question about, you know, we were talking about that first video. The track that your dad had, was there another track, or that track, did that match another track that someone had found in those same mountains? Am I remembering that correctly, or that was a different place?
You are correct. Yeah. The track at Deduct, the track around the pond, and the tracks that are on the road going up to the site that he's following match tracks that have been found on multiple occasions.
And by other people sometimes.
By other people. Most notably, or most famously, it's the same animal that my dad took Dr. Jeff Meldrum to in 1996 at 5 Points, and the tracks that he casted there, which kind of changed the career trajectory for him. It's the same animal. And it's also the same animal that was found in 1991 at the Mill Creek Road tracks. And those were cast by, you know, my dad and Wes Summerlin, Bill Lowry, Dave Bean, Dar Addington, Billy Field, you know, Bob Titmus and John Green were there, you know, to see those as well. But those tracks, that same animal goes back a little farther as well. And it's an animal that Wes Summerlin was familiar with and had seen tracks of for some years prior. to that and was so familiar with the individual that he had a name for it, and he called that individual Big Jim.
Not knowing Big Jim was really
most likely a female.
Yeah.
I mean, she's only a 13.5-inch track, so not huge. We have about a 6 or 7 year period where her tracks are found, and the size of them never changes. So, at that point, we assume that she's mature. I'm also assuming, or fully believing, I guess I should say, that she has a child.
Yeah.
As well. And so she's fully grown, I would think. And at that point, 13.5 inches, at least in my opinion, is a female. And so I call her Big Jill. That's
Big Jill. Okay, there you go.
To her now, or female number 2, I will refer to her as that, as well. But I do like to point out, and I like to say that, Wes naming that individual Big Jim, is not him making a mistake.
Sure.
It's at that point in time, him and my dad and all those other guys, every Sasquatch they saw or they talked about was he. Always.
Of course.
He. They never said she. Or anything like that. It was always a he for whatever reason. Even if you watch my dad's footage, it's, oh, there he goes.
Yeah.
But we know now, or at least we think we know, that it's, like I said, most likely a female.
Yeah.
And we weren't thinking about that.
We call boats she, right? So
yeah.
A boat's a she and a Bigfoot's a he, no matter what it is. So
right. And that's changing, of course. But she is a well-documented individual. I would say that, as far as the Blue Mountains go in that time period, she's the second most documented individual Sasquatch that was around at that time. There's one that's named Wrinklefoot, that Dr. Grover Krantz named Wrinklefoot, that we have more documentation of. And she's one of the most documented individual Sasquatches ever, anywhere.
Really?
But Big Jill is right there, behind her in that area. Yeah, for sure.
Let me ask you, a lot of people don't know that your dad had a second video where he had another sighting. And why do you think that one had never got the attention that the first one did? I mean, it's farther away, so, you can't see it as closely.
Yeah, actually, it's saying my dad had a second video would be saying Deduct Spring, because the video you're talking of is what we call the Green Peak video. And it was before his video at Deduct Spring. And if you watch it, and you'll be able to see it in the book if you've never seen it, he's more excited, actually. Yeah. And this, he jumps out and, whatever he says, I'm not going to repeat because he had a tendency to cuss a little bit, but, he's a little more excited about it. And he kind of tries to chase it down the road and doesn't zoom his camera in at all. So you can't really see it that well. I mean, I know what it is. Right. And I think if you believe in Bigfoot, you know what it is. And if you watch the whole video, there are, footprints that he follows as well in that one. And for a longer duration of time that it Deduct. And we were actually just talking about Wrinklefoot. And I believe that first video, based on the tracks, I believe that's most likely Wrinklefoot, actually. That's in that video. And then it's a different animal in the Deduct one. It's Big Jill. But to answer your question, it just wasn't a good video, and he didn't zoom in, and the road kind of goes up in elevation, so you can't really see the full body. And there's not really much there. And it got some local news coverage at the time, but, not great. And even my dad was not impressed with it. It was just one of those things where he thought it was going to be great. And then it wasn't, and I even remember him saying, like, man, like, this may never happen again. And he was kind of like disappointed that he didn't zoom the camera in, or that, he didn't, I guess, run faster after it, or whatever, everybody expects to do. But, if you haven't heard me say it before, my father was probably the world's worst cameraman that's ever lived. Technology was not his thing. He was not educated in that way. He never finished the 9th grade. He did not have, a literate school education, and working with technology like that, wasn't his thing. And if you've ever seen like the Sasquatch archives with Todd Prescott has, there's that video. Well, it's more audio than video of him and another gentleman when they put the lens cap on the camera, but they can't figure out how to turn it off. And so they're like just like talking and cussing, and like my dad's yelling at the guy to like push the button, and the guy's like, it's not doing anything. And so, you know,
That's hilarious.
But yeah, I mean, it's not a great video, and a lot of people have never seen it, but I figured, you know, let's put it out there, because if nothing else, it's testament to, if you spend the time, you're going to find evidence. Like if you're out there and you know what you're doing, and you are prepared, and you have the time to spend, and you're in the right area, eventually it's going to happen, you know. And people can say that, you know, my dad was too lucky or whatever they like to say, but that's not the truth whatsoever. You know, he was a great tracker and a great hunter, and he was prepared, and he was in the right spot, and he had, you know, location data for 10 years, you know, that he had been following. And, you know, he's got some sightings, and he's got some video, and I guess for the time it was too much, but it's not too much for today's standards. Right. That's for sure.
Now, you sent me over a couple things here before the show, and there's some pictures that you sent. Can I pull those up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So are these pictures, are these ones that you took, or maybe your brother did or something?
These were taken by my older brother, Dwayne.
Okay.
Yes. On October 5th, 1988.
I assume it's up in here somewhere, probably. And then you have, are these the same picture? 3 different picture? This and this look the same.
It's 2 different pictures. One's just a little more zoomed in. Yeah. Okay. My dad and my brother were deer hunting, actually, and this is just right outside the watershed boundary at the bottom of Tiger Canyon before you start to head up the road there. And my brother had a camera on him. My dad had the video camera that he had rented at the time, because he didn't own one yet. And so he was renting every time he went out a video camera. But they're about 200 yards apart from each other.
Okay.
100 to 200 yards. There's different estimates. It was never walked off. So it's just an estimate on how far it was. But yeah, my brother actually thought there was a deer coming, or an elk possibly. And it ended up being Bigfoot. And he snapped a couple pictures, 2 or 3 pictures real quick, and took off running to down where my dad was, you know, like I said, about 100 to 200 yards away, and told my dad, it's going to come out right in front of you, because apparently it was headed for right where my dad was sitting. Well, it didn't come out right in front of him. My brother getting up and running off caused it to change its trajectory. And it ended up disappearing into the woods and kind of going away from them, maybe about 150 yards from where it was supposed to show up. But yeah, my brother took these. You don't see them very often. And there's more than just the ones we have on screen there. But yeah, I'm going to put all those in the book as well, so people can take
I mean, to me, that thing's got awful big arms. It looks like it's in some tall grass.
They're long. Yeah, it's in some tall grass. There's also some light play at work here, where you can see the sun is hitting it like in the face and in the front of the body. It kind of gives it the appearance of maybe having like real skinny legs.
Right.
But I don't think that it does. But yeah, it certainly has really long arms, and it almost looks like, you know, the forearm from the elbow to the hand is extremely long,
right,
where the upper arm is a little bit shorter. But again, you can't really tell from the angle. So
right. Okay.
Was there a time that your dad wanted to actually try to shoot one?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I kind of remember that he changed that right over the course of years. Like in the beginning, he was trying to kill one, and then as he didn't, or he got to know them better, or got to respect them, maybe the word would be, then he didn't want to do that.
Yeah, and you know, we talked about Good Morning America a little bit earlier. You know, if you've seen that segment, he clearly just says on that show he's going to put one on the table, you know, for the scientists to look at and prove that he's not crazy, you know. But yeah, over the years, that changed, and actually, you know, those pictures my brother took there, which were in '88, which is the year after Good Morning America was filmed. That was actually kind of the beginning of my dad changing what he was thinking. You know, they were deer hunting that day. They both had, you know, rifles on them. It's something that could have been picked up. A shot could have possibly have been taken. My my dad kind of forgot, I think, to pick his rifle up, at that point in time. And he tried to take some video footage of it. But like I said, he had a rented camera, and for some reason the film wouldn't advance, and he wasn't sure what he was supposed to be doing. And, one mess leads to another when it comes to him and the damn cameras and technology. But, I do remember him saying that particular day, as it was walking away, it kind of turned its head possibly to look at them. And he was reminded of how much like us they actually are. And he kind of started having a little bit of a change of heart on, wanting to shoot one. And, by the time 92 rolls around and he actually got the video footage, he wasn't carrying a gun, on him anymore. It was always brought, and it was always in his truck, but he wasn't, it wasn't strapped to him anymore. And by the end of his life in 2003, he actually had progressed to being just an advocate for leaving them alone and not even bothering them anymore.
One of the things I've never heard talked about is, did your dad ever hear vocalizations out there? When he was in there, you hear the brush popping. I know several times I read where, he'd hear that happening or whatever. Maybe one time when he was camping, they might've been screaming up on a cliff or something above him, if I remember right. But did he ever hear, the traditional wood knocks or, whoops or anything else like that?
There's some vocalizations. Yeah. And there's actually going to be a nice little video included in the book of a presentation he gives at the Western Bigfoot Society in 1997, where he kind of talks about hearing vocalizations as far back as 1982. And them sort of sounding like, the young elk, but he could tell that it wasn't quite the same. Like something wasn't quite right. Almost like they were trying to mimic, the elk. But yeah, there's a few instances of some other vocalizations. I know we have some threatening, aggressive vocalizations after the footage was taken at Deduct. And unfortunately, the camera was shut off at that point for some self-preservation and just to kind of try to turn around and get out of there. So it wasn't recorded. And I have in my possession one audio cassette that potentially has vocalizations on it, where you can hear my dad say, talking about being able to hear them, but you can't hear it on the tape. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't include that in the book because there's nothing to listen to. Maybe we can enhance that at some point. It's something I'm trying to work on, but I mean, there's nothing there for that. But he does talk about them whistling and mimicking elk and, making threatening, I guess you would say, like low guttural kind of vocalizations and possibly like louder screams. No reports, nothing, never talked about wood knocks ever in 15 years. No incidents of that ever happening. Also, no structures ever in 15 years being found in an area that was, somewhat of a hot spot. That surprises some people. Maybe it wasn't something that was actively being looked for at the time. But
Heaven knows it is now.
Right. And, I'm personally, to me, I'm of the opinion that they probably don't build at least complicated fine structures, and that's a lot of the stuff that people find is, natural mathematics and just the way that things fall and the world works. And, everything in the world is based on math and things grow and fall and change and blow in patterns, and it happens. And not everything you see is, some fancy structure that's built by a Sasquatch. But I also will admit that I don't know. And, there's a possibility, of that as well. But, as far as my dad's research goes, I can tell you no structures, no wood knocks ever. Never.
I tend to agree with you. Now that you said it, if I'm remembering correctly, didn't your dad, when he shot the video that everybody has seen of the people, once again, they can go on YouTube and look up Paul Freeman video footage of Bigfoot or whatever. It probably has 7 billion views on it, but wasn't he afraid that day after he shot that he was, really trying to, almost crawl to get out of there? He was spooked.
Yeah, I mean, he was, and there's a reason for that, and you know, the reason is that he thought there was multiple Sasquatch there, and you hear him, you know, in the video say, "Oh, there's two of them, I guess," you know, and then he goes, "Oh God, you know, two of them," and you can tell in his voice he starts to get maybe a little concerned at that point. I don't think there's two Sasquatch in that video, except for an adult and a baby. I don't think there's two adults, and I don't think there's an adult and an older juvenile. I think there's one adult, and I think that what happened was when it goes from, you know, right to left, it takes a different path than what he was expecting it to, and he loses it on camera, which is why he shut the video camera off, was because he was trying to track it, not through the lens of the camera, but, you know, looking for tracks and track it with his own eye. And then the camera comes back on when he sees what he tells us is the second one. And that's the one that picks up the baby. Yes. But I don't believe it is. I think it's the same one. But
especially when you see the overexposed, you know, Tommy, right, it makes it believe that.
And, you know, in his brain, what happened was when he saw what he thought was the second one, was he was thinking that the first one was behind him now because of the direction it went. And so he thought he had one in front of him and one behind him. Oh, and geez. So he didn't actually turn around and go straight back out the way he came in. He kind of went off to the side, I guess what you would call the east, and took a little different trail that he was somewhat familiar with. And at one point, he had thought that, you know, they were making some, were making some threatening vocalizations. And he kind of found a spot where a tree had fallen down and the roots had pulled out of the ground and made like a little den. And he went in there and sat it out for a while. And his estimation, you know, again, it's one of those things, 1 to 2 hours he sat in there in a cold sweat, you know, being scared like a child, is, you know, in his own words. Again, with the time estimation, I don't believe the 1 to 2 hours. He never wore a watch. We didn't have cell phones, and there was no timestamp on the camera, which wasn't even turned on at that point in time. I think maybe it was probably more like 20 to 30 minutes, which may have felt like 2 hours.
Sure.
But I don't think his concept of time was correct. And the reason I say that was because of what time he got home. Mm-hmm. You know, that day. I don't think it could have been 2 hours. But you know, I can't blame him for losing concept of time, and I can't blame him for being scared if he thought that there was one behind him that was potentially following him and one in front of him. He will refer to them as a bigger one and a smaller one. And so he did think that there was a big one, and then there was one that was a little bit smaller, not a baby, but he refers to it as the little one. The reason for that being is when he saw the Sasquatch for the first time, it was 60 feet away. When he sees it for the second time through the viewfinder, it's 100 feet or more away through the trees, and he's at a slightly higher elevation than it is. And I just think it looks smaller. You know, interesting, though, I will tell you that, you know, we know at that moment when he sees what he thinks is a second one that it picks up, you know, the child. And we can clearly see that now in the enhanced footage, is that he told Vance Orchard, who wrote an article for the Touchy Valley Ramblings, that when he saw that second one, that it looked like it had a deformity, that it had a lump on the side of its neck or its face. Potentially even it was a hunchback, which is really, really interesting, because I think that he was seeing the baby that it had picked up. Yes. And that's what he was thinking was a hunchback, you know, at the time.
Well, this baby footage, you know, I've seen it. Russ has seen it now. It's only kind of available. You said it's kind of only available in the book, right? It's not really out there publicly right now.
Well, the enhanced version. I mean, okay, if you get your hands on, you know, the original footage or whatever there is on YouTube.
Well, honestly, the original footage, I watched it 50 times and I didn't see nothing.
It's hard to
see anything.
It's hard to see. You have to know, number one, you have to know exactly when it happens, right? And you have to, I guess, kind of have an indication of what you're looking for to be able to see it, which makes it even more remarkable that, you know, Doug Hychek noticed this, you know, in 2000, almost 10 years after my dad shot it. Nobody had ever seen this. They hadn't noticed it. And Doug Hychek notices this weird anomaly when he's like watching it frame by frame and, you know, slow motion or whatever, you know, he's doing. Matt Moneymaker had, you know, sent the video to Doug and said, hey, check this out. And Doug's reviewing it, and Doug's, what the heck is that? You know, and watches it again and blows it up. And he's got this cool little story in my book that, you know, he kind of tells about what he did afterwards, which makes perfect sense, you know, and I'll save that for Doug to tell you in the book. But, you know, and then he took it to my dad. But yeah, you can't see in the original. And I've been really vocal of saying that, like, I was a skeptic on this. I didn't believe there was a big, you know, there was a baby Bigfoot in this video until this last year. You know, and I remember telling people maybe 6-7 years ago that were talking about this rumor, you know, online. Oh, there's no Bigfoot in there. I don't want you to talk about this. I don't support this, you know, but I certainly do now. And I've seen enough enhancements of it that if it's not a baby being picked up, and that's not a leg and a foot and a head that you can see, somebody please tell me what else is going on.
It's unmistakable what it is. It's absolutely unmistakable.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm sure that there's certain people out there, you know, that are going to say that's not what it is, or they're, you know, but I think if you watch it, that's what it is. I have shown the video privately, you know, to some people, and I did a special presentation for Cliff Berrickman down at the North American Bigfoot Center for the 30th anniversary of the film. And we had about 50 people. It was private, you know, ticket holders only. Nobody in that room had ever seen the Bigfoot baby footage. They didn't even know about it. I asked the question beforehand. I was like, you know, anyone ever seen this? And only my family and, you know, Cliff and one of his employees had ever even heard of this before. And people start watching this, and it's like silent, and everybody's watching the enhancement, you know, whatever. And then, you know, that part comes on, and all of a sudden people start talking. And I heard like one, oh my God. And then people start pointing, and then everyone's talking. And then you start hearing women, you know, was the first thing that kind of made me smile. Is there's this woman in the crowd, and she's obviously a mother. And she's like, she's picking up a baby, and she starts like making this motion because, you know, and the mothers instantly realized what was going on there. But yeah, if you haven't seen it, you know, it's going to be in the book. That'll be the first place you'll be able to see enhancements of it. But yeah, get a hold of me, please. You know, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and tell me what's going on if you don't think that's a baby, you know, being picked up by its mother in that footage.
All right.
It's a shame that, you know, your father wasn't around so that we could all pick his brain about some of these things now. You know, it'd be amazing what he could do with some of the newer technology, you know, if he was able and had the health to be able to do it in the field. But I knew I was looking at those maps that he put out there, and, you know, and I don't live in that part of the country, but it's so cool to look at his maps and try to figure out why he thought that they were traveling along a certain course. And then, you know, he had this one area circled, and it said, you know, possible bedding area, you know, and he hadn't found beds there, but, you know, I just wanted to know, what is it that what made him think that? You know, I mean, there's so much that all of us that are out there all the time could have learned, you know, and if he would have said, well, you know, sometimes we find this or whatever, then, you know, all of us could have looked for it in different areas of the country. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, once you start getting to the east side of that map there, you run into what's called the Winnehaw Two-Cannon Wilderness, which is 180,000 acres with no roads. You know, you can't drive a vehicle in there. The only access is by foot or by horseback. And a lot of that area, you know, once it hits November, you can't even get in there. You know, at that part, you'd have to snowshoe in if you were brave enough, or be dropped off by a helicopter. And you may not come out of there. And so he, you know, really had a thought process that that's where they might be wintering, and they might be nesting in that deep forest, more towards, you know, Hell's Canyon, Idaho, which is basically that Winnehaw Wilderness ends up being the Nez Perce reservation, and then, you know, runs into Hell's Canyon. But yeah, so possible nesting area. There's some spots on the map, you know, that's are question marks as well, which are cave systems basically in the Winnehaw Wilderness that he had, you know, thought that they possibly, you know, might be spending some time in. With that, I will tell you that he did not believe that they were living in caves, at least for extended periods of time, and that they would never live in a cave that didn't have more than one entrance to it. If they were spending, any amount of time in that, and that they seem to be nesting more out in the open or amongst the trees in places like that, where they did have, vision and, routes to be easily able to move in a hurry if they had to. But no, the map is fantastic. If you've never seen it, Cliff Berickman is the curator of the map. He has it at the North American Bigfoot Center. It's on display there. It's on the wall. It's framed. It's beautiful. He's got nice lights there, and you can get really close to it where you can look at and read everything. But yeah, I'm going to have it in the book as well with, kind of detailed explanations on what the symbols mean and kind of how to read those to, the best of my knowledge. I think there's a few things on there that is still kind of a mystery to this day. But unfortunately, as you said, my father's not around anymore to ask that question.
Do you ever go up there by yourself, to visit these areas any longer?
I have not been to Deduct Spring in 15 years. I am going 2023 next year. Cliff Berickman and I plan to make a trip out there. We may be planning to do something out there that's not really prepared to speak about, too much at the moment,
Sure.
But we might be up there together to, do a little bit of research and see, what we can figure out more about the footage, because we're always on the footage, and Doug Highcheck is enhancing it, and, Cliff Berickman's got it, down there, and I've lent him the master, and he's enhancing it, and we're doing measurements and we're looking into it. And, I want to know as much about it as possible, and to just find out as much as we can, size, especially. That's one of the things we want to know. I would love to have like an obstetrician come in and look at it and compare the abdomen to what they know about other like great apes and get some kind of medical opinion on if they think that it's postpartum. We don't know the gestation period. And if the one in the footage is even a year old, it's possible she could be pregnant again. So, it's either either or, as far as that goes. But no, I haven't been up there in a little while. I actually haven't been back to Walla Walla in 6 years. I think 2016 was the last time I was there. I'm in Spokane, so I'm about 2.5, hours north of there. But I certainly do need to get back, one of these days at least.
Well, the first thing I thought about was when you said that your dad noticed that every 3 years they kind of had increased activity. The first thing I thought of was, well, okay, why? Why every 3 years? Is that a gestation period? This is where they come and they give birth, blah, 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 and every 3 years. So,
well, it seems, in that area, especially in the Blue Mountains, it's because of the weather patterns, there is moisture that comes in from the coast because of where the mountain range sits and how it kind of dog legs out. But it is an arid, it's kind of arid. And one of the things I do know is every 2 or 3 years, we have a summer that's just a little bit drier than the previous one, And so I think that Deduct Spring is a really viable water source. It's always cold. It comes right out of the ground. It runs into Walden Pond and it never dries up. And so I'm kind of putting it to being, good, fresh, cold, drinkable, viable water. Every 2 or 3 years, it gets a little drier there. We have a little hotter summer and the activity picks up in that particular area. And then maybe the next year it's not so dry. And it dies off because there's other water sources they can use that aren't so close, to that. Deduct Spring and Walden Pond there as well. I mean, it sits right in front of the watershed boundary. If you continue to the left where that animal goes off of the camera, about 20 yards is a 15-foot ravine that drops. And that's where the spring actually runs through. And then just past that, if you come up the other side, is the watershed boundary. And these things are not dumb. And we have a lot of reports of them moving, people, eyewitness accounts in that area, and even the footprints in that area a lot of times go directly into the watershed.
They know that they can't be touched.
Yeah,
So,
well,
You know, Michael, your dad was the right man at the right place in the right time.
and
And,
honestly, I could see him walking around now with his GoPro on his chest or on his hat, you know, and always got it turned on. And you've taught him about technology, and boy, he's out there getting all kinds of stuff now, right?
well,
Yeah.
man, I wish, it's hard to think like, what if even like this, like my iPhone, the camera on it is so good, right? Even if he'd have just had that in 92, would we have better footage than the Patterson footage? Would it be better, even if it would have been 16 millimeter, God, it would have been fantastic. We could have at least done something to enhance it, but unfortunately it is what it is. And it was a third hand, camera that was given to him by my uncle, and it was given to him by a friend of his, and that kind of thing. And it wasn't something that was purchased, which is why we don't know the exact camera, and we only have a couple of pictures of him holding it kind of in the distance. And so it's like, but yeah, man, GoPros, game trail cameras, cell phones, any of this stuff, drones. God, I wish, we'd have had access to that kind of stuff, which also, we have that now, and we still don't have anything
right
than my dad or Patterson. And I'll tell you why. Here's why. It's my opinion. It's because a lot of the Bigfooters now are lazy.
yes,
They're not trained hunters and trackers like my dad was, who could track stuff without that kind of equipment.
yes,
And they're relying on going out with that when they have reports of something. A lot of these guys aren't out there
that's right.
5 days a week like my dad. It's like, oh, I heard a report, let me go check it out. And my dad was living out there. And, if you listen to his audio and you read the book, and Russ, I know you've gone through it, he talks about being gone 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
And my mom not knowing if he's alive or dead because, all we got is a CB radio in his truck where he parked it, and one at home, and she can't even hear from him, and a lot of the people, and I'm not saying everybody, there's great researchers out there that find a lot of evidence. Mr. Tom Shea in Kentucky, he's got a lot of evidence. He's boots on the ground. He's out there, all the time. And, Cliff Berrickman and a lot of these guys, do spend a lot of time out there, but not like the old timers did.
Right.
No.
That's a big difference.
And a lot of it is the curse of technology, because they don't think that they need to do that stuff anymore. But if you take the old school trackers and you take guys like my dad or, Bob Titmus,
Yes.
or, Roger Patterson, or some of those guys, and you have the skill of an outdoorsman and a tracker, and you give them that technology and you put them in an area where these things, at least migrate through, just daydreaming of what could have been.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see a lot of us, like, I was out today. I have my GoPro going the whole time. And, Doug and I have talked about, 4 seconds of fairly close 4K quality video would compel a lot of people, and so that's, it's right on my hiking stick every day when I go out there, and, you're just hoping for that lucky break.
It would compel people. But at the same time, you're going to get the same thing that you get with my dad's and you get with Patterson's and all that, until there's a body sitting right here next to me that we can study, and no one's going to believe it.
And honestly, when Fox does the, Bigfoot autopsy 1 hour special on Wednesday night, people still aren't going to believe it. So
I mean, exactly. People still aren't going to believe it. I don't think personally, I kind of agree with something we talked about earlier, is I personally don't think that the government wants you to believe it. And I don't think that they want you to know. And it's not just my dad. You go back to 1972 and John Minezinski in Wyoming, when he had his encounter there, when he was, working for the Forest Service as a biologist, they told him to shut up or he wouldn't work for the government anymore.
Sure.
And so it's kind of similar, in those circumstances. And I bring him up because he came to the Blue Mountains and he spent some time with my father, and took some casts and stuff from some trackways with my dad. So
just think about what would happen to Yellowstone or some of these large,
right?
dollar, that's dollars coming into these parks and generating a lot of income. And next thing you know, we got this 8 foot, 9 foot, 800-pound animal walking around out there that's very intelligent. So you either got guys with guns that aren't supposed to have guns, or you just simply have people that simply won't go into the woods.
And I wish I had an audio recording, of it, but I don't. But one of the things, my dad used to talk about was Grover Krantz told my dad, if he ever kills one, that he needs to have a private buyer to buy that from him before he releases any information to the media. Because if he ever kills one and he tries to bring it and present a body, that these men would show up at the house and they would knock on the door and they would take it away. And then they would do everything in their power to discredit him and make him look like he was a liar or it didn't happen, and that he would just be left with nothing. But if he had a private buyer lined up already, and let's say like $1 million, that he could kill one, sell it to someone, and then they could come take the body and discredit you, and you'd still have $1 million.
Well, that's funny. Is because, if everywhere I go Bigfooting or I'm driving in the wood, driving around, and, I literally had a sighting, a road crossing 5 minutes from my house. And I know if I hit this thing, I'm not calling the sheriff. I'm not calling whoever. I'm covering it up. I'm trying to get it in my truck or dragging it off the thing and not letting anybody see it. And I'm calling Russ.
Yeah,
I'm calling somebody to get this thing in the back of my truck, and it's being hidden because I'm not calling anybody.
Right.
At all. Period. Because you're exactly right.
Doug Highcheck and Jeff Meldrum.
Right. There you go. I put them on a plane. Guys.
Cut its head off, cut its hand off, cut its foot off.
Right.
You don't need the whole body. Right. But yeah, my dad actually, based on that advice, at one point in time, there was a gentleman in Texas, and I can't remember the guy's name to save my life. But he had something to do with oil.
Yeah, Tom Slick,
oil businessman. It may have been Tom Slick. Because I know he had worked with Titmus for many years, yes. But he had offered my dad like $1 million. So my dad had a buyer lined up in case something like this had ever happened. And of course, it didn't. Well, but,
back in the 1990, $1 million, that was a heck of a side hustle if we could have got it done. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah. It would have been fantastic. Right.
So he kept telling your mom, Hey, it's $1 million. All I gotta do is kill one. It's $1 million. That's the reason I'm going up here.
Just hold on.
Hold on. I'm going to get it.
It's one of the things, my dad does talk about, and part of the audio, in the book is, when this is proven, when somebody finds one, we're all going to win, That's right. And this stuff is going to be worth my time, to do it. But it wasn't a financial decision. And I've heard some, don't start yawning. Come on.
I know. I'm sorry.
I've heard over the years people, they try to make every excuse in the book. Oh, Paul Freeman was doing it for the money, which is absolutely laughable. Yeah. We never had any money, and he certainly wasn't doing it for that. We, almost went, broke a few times, due to like Bigfoot research and all that stuff. But it would have been something. And again, same with the camera equipment or whatever. Like, what if in 92 he would have still been carrying his gun 60 feet away?
Right.
But then again, would you pull the trigger? You always think you will, but
well, you always think you will. Yeah. And one of my dad's, thoughts, of course, as well at the time was, if I shoot one, am I going to be able to make it home? Yeah, because he, even though you might see one, he always felt like they were in groups, and that you may not see the other ones.
That's what Grover Krantz always said. It's not the one that you see. The best thing you can do is reload.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not the one you see; it's the one you don't that's going to get you.
Yeah.
And you probably,
and
think about how that would have affected your dad if he would have shot this thing, and it goes down, and he goes up, and there's a baby on it. What would he have done at that point in time? You know what I mean?
How
would that affect him mentally or, psychologically?
I guess at that point in time, you grab the baby
and bail.
And bail. I mean, I don't know. You'd have to ask him, but I would have to think that if he had the opportunity to grab a baby and capture it, maybe he wouldn't have, because he also talks about he doesn't want one to be in captivity because they would torture it to death. Right. And he didn't want to see that happen to one. He'd rather one be killed by somebody. Right. I, on the other hand, I agree, but I don't even want one killed. I would rather a logging truck like run over one in the middle of the night, and if not kill it, take a big chunk of flesh off of it, or something like that. I think that's best case scenario, right. But you don't know what you would do until it happens. Man, killing one's one thing, but killing one and then grabbing its baby and trying to make it out of the wilderness with other possible ones there, that's a whole different different story.
I do believe horror movies have been made out of that.
That's that exact scenario, right? But who knows?
All right.
I mean, the reality is, none of us are even hardly seeing Bigfoot, so we're probably safe, maybe.
The reality of all of it, I mean, if you wanted the truth, is, we have the Patterson film and we have my dad's footage and stuff, and that's what we assume, or that's what we think Bigfoot is, because that's the visual evidence we have. But in reality, we don't know what it is.
Right.
And we don't even know what they really look like in like great detail. They could all be different.
Right.
Like some people can be. And until we do have a body, we're not going to know like a lot of those things. But, one of the things that kind of irritates me from time to time is when people assume that every Bigfoot should look exactly like Patty, and it should move and walk exactly like Patty. Right. Which may not be the case, just like in people and in other great apes and, chimpanzees, especially, I know they can have vastly different facial features and even different body structures, and they're going to walk differently. And, some of them could be, obviously they're going to be bigger, and some of them are going to be smaller. And I've heard a lot of reports from credible people, of them looking and moving nothing like you see in the Patterson footage or my dad's footage.
Well, a lot of people think that, you have the West Coast Bigfoot that's at 9 to 10 foot tall, 4 foot wide. You get to the East Coast, a little bit skinnier, a little more muscular. Then you get down south, and the next thing you know, I think Russ has some calculation, I do believe, about distance from the equator in miles and how
Bergman's rule.
There you go. Good thing he's a smart one on this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and body size and
Right. So anyway.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it would be safe to assume, like, where it's colder, they would probably have more fur coverage, and stuff like that. And one of the things my dad also talks about is in early spring, right after winter,
they're going to be fat.
They look shaggier than they do in late summer, when their fur and their coat is almost more oily and like sheeny, based on his experience. And the one he saw, early June in '82 had shaggy kind of looking, hair. And the one we have on the footage from August doesn't, and so, I mean, there's obviously going to be different appearance to it, but I don't like that. And the other thing I don't like, and I've spoken of before, is when people assume to know the behavior of a Bigfoot and what it's going to do in every situation. And they discount eyewitness accounts, or they discount video footage, and other things, because, a Bigfoot wouldn't do that, or a Bigfoot wouldn't go that direction, or a Bigfoot wouldn't step that close to a barbed wire fence before it steps over it. And basically what they're saying is, I wouldn't go that direction because, they have no idea what a Bigfoot would or wouldn't do.
Right. I hope, Michael, everybody goes out and buys your book. I mean, the pictures in it, and heaven knows I've seen all the Bigfoot stuff that's out there. There's a lot of pictures in it that have never been made public. And just being able to see collar, close up, like they're going to be able to see in the book. I really think that the book is well done. I think it's going to be, probably the most popular Bigfoot book, that's out there for a while. I mean, I hope that people go grab it.
It's going to be a conversation starter because it's it is not a small paperback. It is a large coffee table book, correct? So you're going to put this on the coffee table with your Wings of Flight, aviary book, and you're going to put them together, and all these great pictures and stuff.
Yeah,
and, it's going to be a great conversation starter.
We have 180 pictures. Are what's going to be in the book, full color, a lot of them full page. There's about 2 hours total of video footage that's going to be in there, and about 1 hour and 20 minutes of audio recordings from my dad's personal recordings. Plus there's 15 pages of original newspaper print articles, so that's even in addition to everything that's written. That's more reading that you can do from the likes of Vance Orchard and some people like that, and the newspaper articles, that they wrote. And I really wanted to keep it like an evidence catalog. And I didn't want to go and get these nice copies of these newspaper articles. And so what I did is I used them directly from my dad's photo albums where they had been cut and pasted in there. And so that's what they're going to look like in the book is, that they've, kind of been cut and pasted in there. And I like the look of it. And I think it works well that way. But I hope people like it. I hope that at least if nothing else, it's entertaining and it sparks some people to take a look at the evidence that's there, and kind of draw your own conclusion from that. And there's some great people that contributed to it, and lended some expertise. And I'm not a writer, so I did my best to put it together and tell some stories from my perspective. But hopefully it's entertaining and it's educational, and there's something for everybody.
All right, great. And you can get this, I assume, anywhere that books are sold, right? You said BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon, all the major retailers. Probably just Google. What's the actual title of the book?
Freeman Bigfoot Files.
There you go. Freeman Bigfoot Files, and I'm sure you can find it anywhere.
Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah. So it should be available to pick up. And if nothing else, you can go to hangar1publishing.com and you can order it, from there as well. All
right. What's your Instagram or your Twitter?
My
or whatever
Instagram is mfreeman77.
Okay.
So either that or Facebook, Michael Freeman on Facebook, pretty easy to get a hold of. And, I usually try to talk to everybody that reaches out to me.
Okay,
so
cool.
Easy to, communicate with. And so I encourage everyone, if they want to talk or have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out. I'm pretty approachable.
Awesome. You got anything else, Russ?
No. Thank you for your time. You're gracious to share things with us that some other people weren't getting to hear, and looking forward to seeing the book in person.
All right.
I'm looking forward to seeing the book in person. Yeah, but no, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it. I ramble a little bit, so sorry for.
Oh, you were great.
Everyone out there.
So you're going to finally see it from start to finish. How long? How many years?
The book?
Yeah.
Like how long from start to finish? Not as long as you would think.
Okay.
Actually, well, I kind of started it in 2016. I kind of tossed the idea around and kind of started it, and then it got scrapped. But this time around, once Doug Hychek got a hold of it and got a hold of me, and we started working on it, it's going to be about 7 months.
Okay. Well, thank goodness for Doug Hychek. Well,
right.
Doug doesn't sleep, so
That's
that's really like about a year and a half. But since Doug doesn't sleep, it only took him 7 months.
Yeah, it's right, exactly. He works, and he's very intelligent. God, love Doug Hychek. But yeah, he made this possible for sure. And it has gone very, very quickly for the technology that's involved in it.
Great. Awesome. All right.
Take us out of here.
Appreciate it. All right. Thanks. All right, Russ. That was very entertaining.
Yeah, he was very informative.
His dad was a wonderful researcher, and like I said, I just don't think we have those guys around anymore. You're out in the woods about as much as anybody I know, but without honestly living in the woods and just doing that took a lot of dedication.
And having that location that he did,
yeah.
I don't even know a place really where I go that is like that, you know, in terms of there's just so much water here everywhere.
Right.
That, you know, he was the right man at the right time for it to happen.
Absolutely, sir. All right. Everybody, you know, where they can listen to us at Spotify, Apple, all that kind of stuff, YouTube.
Subscribe.
Yep. Like, subscribe. Untold Radio Network, Wide Open Research on Instagram. We don't do the Twitter thing. We kept getting banned over the years, so I just quit doing it. So
what about what's our web address, our email, if somebody wants to send a question?
wideopenresearch@gmail.com.
We would love to hear a report. We would love to hear suggestions.
What are you, West WV Bigfoot?
TheBigfootDoc.com.
There you go. TheBigfootDoc.com. You can submit your reports there, and
we have had quite a few people that listen send reports in. I've been talking to some of them, and we're going to have some of those people when we have one coming up here, I think, in a week.
Yep, absolutely, sir. All right. Well, other than that, I'm playing us out.
All right, man.
All right.